Little girl gives a secret signal to her dog. Judge stops the courtroom in shock. This little girl was sitting in the courtroom with her dog. It was a very serious trial, but she didn't care. She had her eyes fixed on her dog. The dog understood what she was doing. He stayed still until the little girl started moving her hand like a helicopter. At that moment, the dog couldn't hold it anymore and he started to laugh. The entire courtroom was stunned. No one could believe what they were seeing. Even the judge stopped writing for a moment. It was then that the little girl spoke up. "I told him not to laugh, but I don't think he understands why we have to be so quiet in here," she said, turning to the judge. "He just can't help himself when I do this." The girl then started moving her hand again like a helicopter. The dog started to shake with laughter. The judge couldn't help but smile. "Well, this is certainly an interesting situation," he said. "But I'm afraid I must ask you to leave, little one. Your presence here is disrupting the trial." The little girl's face fell. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay with her dog. "Please, Judge, can't I stay? I promise I'll be quiet," she pleaded. The judge hesitated. He really didn't want to separate the girl from her dog. But the trial was very important and he needed to focus. "I'm sorry, little one, but I'm afraid you'll have to go. Why don't you go home now and wait for your father to come back?" The girl knew the judge was right. She didn't want to cause any more trouble, so she stood up and said goodbye to the judge and the court. As she walked out of the courtroom, she turned back to look at her dog. He was still sitting there looking at her with his head cocked to the side. She could see that he was trying hard not to laugh. She couldn't help but smile. She knew he was going to be okay. When her father came back into the courtroom, he was greeted by a very stern-looking judge. "I'm sorry, Judge, but I couldn't help it," the man said with a big smile on his face. "My daughter has a funny way of making our dog laugh. I guess it's just a little too much for him to handle sometimes." The judge couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, I'm glad to hear that, sir. But I must ask that you keep your daughter away from the courthouse in the future. I'm sure you understand." The man nodded his head. "Of course, Judge. I'm very sorry for any trouble she may have caused." As the man and the judge shook hands, the dog couldn't contain himself any longer, and he started to bark with laughter. Everyone in the courtroom burst out laughing, including the judge. It was then that the man realized how much trouble his daughter had caused. He picked her up and said, "I'm sorry, little one. You know better than to make the judge angry." The girl apologized and promised it would never happen again. And from that day on, the little girl never made the judge laugh again. Well, maybe once or twice, but only when the trial was over.